Okay, it is Sunday, August 7th. It is day 165. I am going to try to show you how I triangulate on the truth as we do these daily updates. And so here we're going to start here. Most of the attention was out in the Eastern District. This is Bakhmut, this is Sloviansk. And if you go up a little bit further, you'll see um, Kharkiv up here, but the real action is in this pocket here. Remember, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk here fell about a month ago. And then since then, the Russians have been trying to make more and more headway in this direction. This is a Ukrainian multimedia platform for broadcasting, talking about how armed forces of Ukraine repulsed the enemy's assaults in the south, Bakhmut, Sloviansk directions. You see this again. Russians continue to focus their main efforts on the east of Ukraine. The enemy is organized assaults 3 times, attacking from several sides simultaneously, but were forced to retreat. If you look at this map, you'll find that they've gained just a little bit of ground, but not a whole lot. And part of that is because they've had to water down their forces as they move to the south, or the Russians have moved to the south. Okay, Ukraine Zelensky rules out talks if Russia holds referendums. Well, I get it. I mean, if they hold referendums and say we're now no longer part of Ukraine, sham elections is what it'll be. And, you know, like what happened in Crimea, a 97% vote to leave Ukraine. Nowhere do you see 97% vote. So I wouldn't either. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to actually talk with somebody who's having sham elections. If the occupiers proceed along the path of pseudo reforms, they will close for themselves any chance of talk with Ukraine and the free world, which the Russian side will clearly need at some point, said Zelensky. Okay, Ukraine and Russia have blamed each other for renewed shelling on Saturday night of Europe's largest nuclear power plant at Zaporizhia. Volodymyr Zelensky called for new international sanctions for Moscow on nuclear terror. Now, the Russians are parked right they're using the nuclear power plant as a shield. Now, it seems silly to me that the Ukrainians would knowingly fire on the power plant, knowing that that would blow themselves up and then blow out a nuclear blast radius for 90 miles or however far it is to their own country. It would not surprise me if the Russians would do that, because they've just been wantonly destroying everything. So as a false flag operation, similar to the prison break, I could see that potentially happening. But right now, we don't know who's done what. Again, here's another article, and here's Reuters. And now when you're triangulating on the truth, you're trying to figure out who actually did what. So Ukraine power plant shelled again. Zelensky rails at Russian nuclear terror. I highlighted a couple of things in this article that are really useful. Ukraine said on Sunday that the renewed Russian shelling had damaged 3 radiation sensors and hurt a worker at Zaporizhia power plant in the second hit in consecutive days on Europe's largest nuclear facility. That's what Zaporizhia is. It's Europe's largest nuclear facility. Now, there is no such nation in the world that could feel safe when a terrorist state fires at a nuclear plant, Zelensky said in a televised address today. The Russian installed authority in the area said it was Ukraine that hit the site with multiple rocket launchers. But again, why would they do that? Now, here's how you know something is true. Now, I showed you some Ukraine armed forces internet sites with the earlier things, and I'll show you some Russian, some RT stuff in a little bit. But you can tell something's true when you see something like Reuters could not verify either side's version. And that's good. When they say that kind of thing, they're at least being honest about what's going on. Okay, here's The Guardian. Russia's private military contractor Wagner comes out of the shadows in the Ukraine war. I thought this was fascinating because Wagner was always this shadowy group, like the little green men that invaded in Donbass that didn't have any military patches on, but they were clearly military. They just didn't have any anything showing that. Okay, motherland, honor, blood, bravery, Wagner, one of the posters reads. Wait a minute, these guys are supposed to be shadowy figures that don't actually exist. In fact, they've been denied as actually existing. The billboards, which can be seen in several Russian cities, are part of Wagner's efforts to recruit fighters to join its ranks in Ukraine because they need to, because so many people have been, so many casualties, up to 20,000 or so, maybe more than that, killed, and then 2 to 3 times as a multiple wounded. Yeah, they need to. It looks like they've decided that they will no longer try to hide their existence. By now, everyone knows who they are, said Denis Koltkov, former Novogatsky journalist and a longtime observer of Wagner. Wagner was established in 2014 to support pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. That's like their origin, their background story. It's been repeatedly accused of war crimes and human rights abuses, and it has. On paper, it doesn't exist. Russia's senior leadership, including Vladimir Putin, has repeatedly denied claims or connections to Wagner. Its private military companies are officially banned in Russia. Okay, but wink, wink. Again, we know what it is. Russia's war in Ukraine has, however, brought the group out of the dark. Wagner is believed to have played a central part in the capture of Popasna. Popasna, by the way, is where the Ukrainian soldier's head was on the stick. This was just in the thing in the news yesterday. Wagner is often reported by its supporters and members as the orchestra, a reference to German composer Richard Wagner. The group's alleged founder, Dmitry Utkin, has been linked to the far right and is believed to have named it after Hitler's favorite composer, which is absolutely fascinating when the Russians, including Wagner, are going into clear Ukraine of neo-Nazi radicals of the far right in Ukraine. Okay, this is a Twitter post not that long ago. Russian officials up to Putin and state media pretended that Wagner had nothing to do with the Russian state or that it even existed at all. But here's an ad for it, and you can see that ad right here on actual Twitter. Okay, let me go back. And Wagner publicly boasted of its involvement in the war with a message on its website. They have already liberated Popasna. Let us join us to liberate the entire Donbass. Go to your first combat campaign with living industry legends. Okay. The ads say that Wagner also offers soldiers over 240,000 rubles per month. That's essentially about 3,370 pounds, which is a little bit more than US dollars. So it's 4 times, 3 times, 4 times typical soldier's wage. And so that's pretty powerful as an incentive. Wagner is lowering its recruitment standards and hiring convicts, and formerly blacklisted individuals, potentially impacting Russian military effectiveness, said the UK Ministry of Defense in an intelligence brief last week. Even before the conflict, less than 30% of the soldiers were actual professionals. Okay, so some of this is background that we've already talked about, and some of this is like I've talked about some of these things in previous episodes here, so you can go back a little bit. Again, here's that from the actual Twitter. Here is the UK Ministry of Defense today. Poor performance of the Russian armed forces during its invasion of Ukraine has been costly for Russia's military leadership, highly likely resulting in the dismissal of at least 6 Russian commanders since the start of hostilities in February 2022. Now, you don't change commanders unless something's not working. And so if you're changing that many commanders, something's broken. The commanders of, I'm going to skip that one. Let's go down here. The dismissals are compounded by at least 10 Russian generals killed on the battlefield in Ukraine. The cumulative effect on the consistency of command is likely contributing to Russian tactical and operational difficulties. And the Russians have ground to a halt again and again during this 5 months. And now you know part of the reason why. Okay. Amnesty International. Again, I talked about this Amnesty International thing with more biased report, and more evil in these particular episodes. So let's look at this. Amnesty International regrets distress caused by claims in Ukrainian report. Okay, they said they deeply regret the distress and anger caused after it alleged that Ukrainian forces were flouting international law. Now, the thing was just so lopsided. It was like so heavy-handed toward the Ukrainians. And I get it. They were just talking about the Ukrainians, but it gives the impression like that somehow the Ukrainians were doing this. And they gave 3 paragraphs at the very end. I'll show you the report. Here's the report where they said indiscriminate attacks by Russian forces, 1, 2, 3 paragraphs of the whole document. So they, said, oh, well, we talked about what the Russians did too. Well, kind of, but not really. We fully stand by our findings, the group or the rights group said on Sunday, but it also stressed that nothing documented Ukrainian forces doing in any way justifies Russian violations. Yeah, but you just slapped at the Ukrainians. And look, here's the report again. The report was talking about, like, they're interviewing people saying, like, I don't understand why the military is firing from the cities and not from the field, because they want to live. That's why. I mean, they're using a school building, but there's not kids inside. They're not holding them up as shields. It's empty school buildings because they're built really well and they'll give them protection when they're firing. And they even acknowledge so much that humanitarian law does not specifically ban parties from a conflict from basing themselves in schools that are not in session. But it's still, I mean, it was just giving the Ukrainians a black eye. Okay, at any rate, Amnesty International deeply regrets the distress and anger that our press release on the Ukrainian military fighting tactics have caused. It said, we have challenged the world to demonstrate its solidarity with Ukraine through concrete action and will continue to do so. Okay, so even in its apology, look how RT, that's Russia Today, Russian television, like you can watch this live if you go to rt.com and then click live. And I would encourage you to do so. Even in the apology, RT still twisted for its propaganda purposes. So Amnesty apologizes after Ukrainian pressure. Now, you just heard what I read. Now, here's RT. Human rights group Amnesty International has issued an apology for its consternation triggered by its recent report, which, among other things, accused the Ukrainian armed forces of violating international human rights law and endangering civilians. The organization has, however, refused to disavow its findings. Did that sound quite like that? Let's keep reading. In its email, Amnesty insisted that observers had cited Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of regions of at least 19 towns and villages across the country. According to the organization, by positioning its forces in such a manner, the Ukrainian military endangered the civilian populations, thereby subjecting them to the danger of incoming Russian fire. Again, they're going to the original report, not the report in question was published on Thursday while lambasting Russian forces. Lambasting Russian forces. This is their lambast. These three paragraphs are all that it said. It said the Russian forces use banned cluster mines. Ukrainian military's practice of locating military objectives within population areas does not in any way justify indiscriminate Russian attacks. Indiscriminate attacks which kill civilians or damage civilian objects are war crimes. That's hardly lambasting, but they said, in this report, they lambasted Russian forces. The investigation also took aim at the Ukrainian military, claiming that it had displayed a troubling pattern of putting civilians at risk and violating the laws of war by operating from residential infrastructure, including schools. Commenting on the group's finding, Agnes Calamard, now she's cited twice here in the actual report. Commenting on the group's finding, Alice Calamard, Amnesty's International Secretary General, emphasized that being in a defensive position does not exempt Ukraine's military from respecting international human law. Russia, in turn, pointed out that it had repeatedly called out Ukrainian troops for using civilians as human shields, and Amnesty's findings only serve to confirm that. That's not what's going on, but that's the kind of hay that Russia makes out of this. So, okay, that's what's going on. And this is why it's important for you to triangulate, because this thing, the CMS Times, repeated this and this RT almost verbatim. I mean, this whole thing, look at the last one. Russia, in turn, pointed out that it had repeatedly called out Ukrainian troops for using civilians as human shields. Amnesty findings only serve to confirm. So RT is going to get some propaganda value out of even the Amnesty apology. And so this is why it's important that you look at Reuters, you look at The Guardian, you look at Twitter, you look at RT, you look at everything that you can, Radio Free Europe. And I'm going to end with this. Second caravan of grain shipments leaves Ukrainian ports. Thank God fewer people will starve as these ships depart and get out. And that's where I want to leave us. Hey, thank you for your time. And I appreciate your being willing to listen to us today.